All right, we're getting started here on the Panther-Lair Show, the Panther-Lair podcast, the live stream on YouTube. We are live. We welcome everybody in. Thanks everyone for joining. Just want to make sure our audio and everything is where it needs to be. Get started on the podcast here tonight, a Tuesday night, as we do. There we go. Make sure we had all our audio settings the way they're supposed to be. Sometimes you get this nervous panic right before you start something like a podcast, and you wonder if you set everything up the way it's supposed to be set up. And, I don't know why you wait until you actually start recording your podcast to try and figure out if you have everything set up the way it's supposed to be set up. But, you should probably check those things ahead of time. But anyway, welcome into the podcast. Appreciate you listening. If you're on the YouTube live stream, we appreciate you checking it out. Good to see people starting to check in. And we're here again to talk Pitt sports for a while. 45 minutes, an hour, half hour, who knows? Whatever. Whatever we can come up with to keep ourselves occupied. We appreciate everybody who listens to the podcast. And I do want to say, if you get a chance to check out the live stream sometimes on Tuesday nights, 8:30 p.m., it's fun because you can get in the comments and you can interact. You can post questions, you can post comments, reactions, and we can have a little conversation. And, I think last week's podcast, I had a couple topics to discuss, and I did talk about them, but then we also got a lot of feedback on the comments, and so we're able to have a little bit more of an extended discussion about, Pitt sports. And I was having a conversation with somebody earlier on Tuesday, just talking about different things, and we talked about whether it makes sense to even talk about sports right now. If we're, I don't even know what the right way to put it is. If we're just focusing on something silly and inconsequential when there are obviously things of much greater consequence going on in the world right now. And I understand that point of view. But I really believe, and I wrote about this in the 321 column on Friday on Panther-Lair.com, and I really believe this, and I'll say, here as well, because we're about to tape a podcast where we talk about Pitt sports for an hour or so. I feel like sports is one of the few things that we can kind of cling to right now. It's one of the few things we can hold on to for normalcy, for whatever approaches normalcy, for whatever counts as normalcy these days. Everything else in life is turned upside down. I mean, there isn't one element of your life right now that is not completely backwards from where it was a month and a half ago, right? I mean, what is not different? I mean, I can't think of anything that hasn't changed. But the one thing we can do, the entertainment, I think in general, you can watch movies at home and you can, watch TV shows. Everybody on the Tiger King, and certainly because I do this podcast on a Tuesday night at 8:30, I'm going to miss out on watching an episode of Tiger King tonight. So this watch, the binging of that show, which for me is one episode a day or one episode a night, it should be, is going to take it a little bit longer. But I mean, talking about sports is. It's something we could do that, there's no sports going on right now. We don't know when sports is going to happen again. And not to go too far down the road of whether there's going to be college football or not. I don't know if there's going to be college football or not. But I don't think it hurts anything if you and I sit here on a Tuesday night or whenever you listen to this podcast and we just talk about sports as if it's happening. Not as if the games are being played right now, but we just talk about it as a normal thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with just sitting back, talking a little ball. And I mean, for whatever degree or for whatever, extent we're going to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with just sitting back and pretending like it's a normal Tuesday in the middle of, or at the end of March, beginning of April, and just talking Pitt football or Pitt basketball or recruiting or coaching or whatever it is that we may be so inclined to talk about on this particular podcast. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because just for this a little bit of time, maybe we can feel normal. We can do what we would normally do. And I think that's, it's not going to save anybody. It's not going to change your life or change your outlook on things. It's certainly not going to change the situation. But maybe it, like I say, gives you a little bit of normalcy. So come down this path of normalcy with me as we talk about Pitt sports and Pitt football. We got a series running on Panther-Lair.com this week, and I hope you've gotten a chance to check it out. It's a series of articles, And yeah, I haven't really given this series a name. Coaching Change Tales is kind of, I guess, what we've sort of called it. And really, it's reflections and perspective from the players who lived through Pitt's coaching changes at the beginning of the last decade. Of course, Dave Wanstead resigns. You can actually see my air quotes now since we do the live stream. It resigns at the beginning of December 2010. Mike Haywood's hired. He is then fired on January 1st, 2011. Then Todd Graham is hired. Todd Graham leaves in December of 2011. Paul Chryst is hired. Paul Chryst leaves in December of 2014. Pat Narduzzi is hired, which brings us to the present. That's a lot of coaching changes over the course of 5 years, 6 years, five head coaches in 6 years, not counting the interims. That's a lot of coaching changes over the course of that time. And, we've all written and talked a lot about the coaching changes and written and talked about a lot about that coaching carousel. And there was certainly a lot written at that time. And there have been retrospectives done on that period of time. But I thought of something really interesting to do since there's no spring camp to cover. I thought one thing to do with this extra time, and obviously we're still producing content on Panther-Lair.com. We're putting a lot of articles out on Panther-Lair.com and generating conversation topics and all of that kind of thing. I thought, you know what? We're not going to be covering spring camp. Let's put this time, let's dig in on, we'll contact a bunch of those guys who went through the coaching changes, guys who played for Wanstead and ended up playing for Graham, or guys who, came in with Graham and played for, Paul Chryst, or guys who came in with Chryst and played for Narduzzi, and, some guys played for 2 or 3 of those guys, or, some all 4. I mean, it's, well, maybe not all 4, but, 1, 2, I mean, nobody played for Haywood, so we're not going to be able to count him. But anyway, let's reach out to those guys and see what they have to say. What was it like to go through that experience? And so I did, and talked to a bunch of guys, probably some of the names you would expect, Pac Bostic and Cam Sadler. We talked to J.P. Holtz and Artie Rao. A lot of guys had interesting input on that period and what it was like in their life and what that experience was like. And hopefully you've gotten a chance to check the articles out, because I think it was really interesting feedback from those guys about getting the news that their coach was leaving, or meeting the new coach, or some of the most interesting stuff was the in-between, between the time the last coach left and the time the new coach got there. Because I was curious, like, are these kids, I mean, these football players, these college players, are they, how closely are they following the coaching search? They probably don't have sources in the Cathedral. They probably don't have sources in the Peterson Event Center that are going to tell them that much in the way of details of what's actually happening. So how much are they reading the papers? Are they following on Twitter and reading the message boards and trying to find out who's going to be their next head coach? So check out that series, because I think it's pretty interesting. And putting that together and interviewing those guys, I really got to thinking about that time and what Pitt went through over those years when they had change after change after change. And I'm going to open a beer for this one. I'll talk about this more in a second. I got the Elysian, what is this called? Contact Haze. It's a hazy IPA. I've been loving this lately. I've been drinking this, I don't want to say a lot, but I've been drinking it a fair amount. And it's good. It's really good. I'm going to be disappointed when I run out, which I haven't had to buy beer yet since the pandemic started, but I'm getting close to that point. So it's starting to really hit home. But I started thinking about those coaching changes and what they did to Pitt and the impact they had. And I think we often talk about it and we toss it around, the coaching change this, coaching change that. I don't know if we give it the full amount of credit, I guess you could say, it deserves for what it did to the program and where it put the program and how it set the program back to go through the changes that they went through, from Dave Wanstead to Mike Haywood to Todd Graham to Paul Chryst. And I mean, the Todd Graham year was the most damaging. I mean, the Todd Graham year was the one that I think really set the program back. And a big part of it was just recruiting. That 2011 recruiting class was just, I mean, it was lost. They signed 21 guys in that class, and I'm looking at the commitment list now. Nicholas Grigsby played 5 years. Lafayette Pitts played at Pitt for 5 years. And Artie Rao played at Pitt for 5 years. Oh, Cannon Mosley-Smith. So, I mean, you have 4 guys. 4 guys who put in full... Oh, and Isaac Bennett. I shouldn't leave out Isaac Bennett. So 5 guys out of 21 who put in full, careers at Pitt with varying degrees of productivity. 5 guys out of 21. That you can't have a lost class like that. And the 2012 class, which Paul Chryst inherited from Todd Graham and really wasn't much better, because Paul Chryst inherited it and then had to kind of run a bunch of guys off. That was 16 guys. Bam Bradley played a full time. J.P. Holtz, Ryan Lewis, Mike Caprera, Adam Bisnavati, Daryl Render, and that's it. How many guys did I just name off there? Bam Bradley, 1. J.P. Holtz, 2. Ryan Lewis, 3. Mike Caprera, 4. Adam Bisnavati, 5. And Daryl Render, 6. So you got 6 out of 16 guys who finished their careers at Pitt, played their whole careers at Pitt. Now, 6 out of 16 is better than 5 out of 21, but that's what? Combine it, 11 out of 37 over the course of 2 years. You can't get, you can't have 26 out of 37 guys that you signed over the course of 2 years, fail to finish their eligibility and not suffer the repercussions and the impact of that down the road. When you have that kind of instability, roster instability, it's going to hurt you down the road. And it didn't. I mean, you saw what Paul Chryst was working with, and you saw what Pat Narduzzi inherited and the hole that he tried to dig it out of. And it's not, I think Paul Chryst, I think Chryst and Narduzzi both did pretty well to rebuild to some degree. I mean, obviously Paul Chryst did a pretty good job rebuilding the offense and getting a pretty good offensive line that Pat Narduzzi would then inherit and, really kind of, carry him through in 15 and 16. And I think Pat Narduzzi obviously has done a great job rebuilding the defense, which, the defensive recruiting is on Paul Chryst, and the lack of offensive recruiting in recent years is on Pat Narduzzi. There's no question about that. But you really tie it back to that 2011-2012 period, and really the year of 2011, that set this program back. And when you have, effectively 2 lost recruiting classes, and when you only get 11 productive guys out of 2 years of recruiting, those are lost recruiting classes. It's hard to recover from that. It's hard to come back from that. And I mean, you're on the other side of it now. You're moving on the other side of that. I think that you're getting past it, and you're certainly getting past the point where you can use that as an excuse. But I don't think you can ignore the impact that it had on the subsequent years. The impact of 2011, of what it had on 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. I mean, I think you could even see the tentacles of that reaching into 2017. It really had that big of an impact. And I think, that's history and backstory that maybe Heather Lyke doesn't have. She may or may not be aware of what Pitt went through in the early part of the 2010s. She actually might have seen it. She might have referenced it, and so she might have, awareness of it, maybe more than I'm giving her credit for. But I think as fans, as media, as people on the outside, as we look at the current state of Pitt football, and we talk about, is it where it needs to be? Is this a make or break season for Pat Narduzzi? I don't think I would fault you if you're a little gun shy about making moves, given how the last time Pitt made moves, how it worked out. I mean, you've got a coach now who wants to stay at Pitt. I mean, I think he made that clear this past offseason. He wants to stay at Pitt. He's had moderate levels of success. I think moderate's a fair word, don't you? He has had more success than the coaches that preceded him. And I would date that back to Dave Wanstead. Yes, Wanstead won 27 games over 3 years in 2008, 2009, and 2010. So you've got that number. Pat Narduzzi hasn't won 27 games over the course of any of his 3 years. I mean, you can't find it through. I guess his strongest stretch would be 15, 16, 17 when he won, 16 and 5. He won 21 games. And then these last 3 years, that next 3 year period of 17, 18, 19, he won 12, 20 games. So, no, he hasn't won 27 games over the course of 3 years, but, he does have some hardware in winning the Coastal Division, which Dave Wanstead did not do. I mean, he didn't have a division to win, but he didn't win the Big East. For as much as we want to say about the Coastal Division, I think you could say a lot of those things about the Big East as well. And probably, I mean, you can make a good case that the Big East was worse than Pitt, particularly, or worse than the ACC Coastal Division, particularly in those last few years when Wanstead won 27 games. And you also can't look back at those 27 wins in those 3 seasons and say, well, there's no disappointments in there. Because as good as those 27 wins were, you know, as impressive as that 9-win season and 10-win season and, 8-win season, I mean, I can rattle off a half dozen games that every single one you'll say, how could he lose that one? Because for as impressive as it is that they won 27 games over 3 years, their best 3-year stretch since the 1980s, they should have won 30. Right? Bowling Green? Rutgers in 2008? The Sun Bowl? That's 3 games right there. Which one of those games should they have lost? Which one of those games did they, I don't want to say deserve to lose, but I mean, look, they lost to Cincinnati in 2008. What are you going to do? I mean, Cincinnati was a good team. They deserved to go to the Orange Bowl. They were a good team. The other 3, there's no reason to lose to Bowling Green. There's no reason to lose to Rutgers. No reason to lose to, Oregon State in that Sun Bowl. 2009, there's no reason to lose to NC State. I know they have Russell Wilson, but you'll lose that game. West Virginia game? The Cincinnati game? Every single one of those is a disappointing loss. In 2010, they get their teeth kicked in by Miami. They get their teeth kicked in by West Virginia. Both of those games at home, both on national television. They go up to Connecticut and can't get a stop on 4th and 1. And you want to tell me that 8-win season was really satisfying? If you're sitting after this past Pitt football season, this 2019 season, and saying, that Narduzzi is never going to get it done. That was a totally unsatisfying 8-win season. What a, really disappointing. They never should have fired Wani. No, you can't do that. You can. You say whatever you want. But that's illogical. That's a fallacy. Okay? Because they're the same thing. Well, they're not the same thing because, Narduzzi didn't have the blowout losses at home. He had the terrible losses. I mean, Miami and Boston College are both bad losses. There's no question about it. But, I mean, there's not a lot of difference between those two. Excuse me. In 2010, Pitt claimed a share of the Big East Championship. I can't take that away. Far be it from me to take that away. So I guess my point is, does the history of this thing, the recent history, and where this program has been, and what happened the last time they tried to change coaches because a guy wasn't winning enough, does it make you apprehensive, a little gun shy about going down that same path? Or do you look at it and say, well, all right, Narduzzi, he's got some disappointing losses in there. He won the Coastal, and he went 7-7. 2016, wasted a great offense. 2017, they were just a mess. 2018, they go 7-7. This past year, they should have won 10 games. It's disappointing. He's had some disappointing moments in there. But he has generally achieved right around an 8-win level. And if you can keep that as your... I can't say that he's kept that as his floor, because he's got a 5-win season and he's got a 7-win season. But if you can stay right around 8 wins, then that should give you the opportunity to propel upward, right? To be where you want to be, to have those 9-win seasons, those 10-win seasons. Now that makes 2020 very, very important. That makes 2020, if it happens, it makes 2020 very important for Pat Narduzzi because he needs to actually take that next step. This is the best opportunity he's going to have had in his first 6 years at Pitt to take a step forward and potentially win 9 games or 10 games or whatever it is. But, I think, like I say, 10 years ago, they fired a guy because he, it wasn't good enough. And he wasn't achieving it, that much better of a level than the current guy is. So if you say they never should have got rid of Wanstead, They could have given him a few more years to see what he could do. I think that logic probably applies to Narduzzi as well. Probably should. Probably. But that was just as I was thinking about coaching searches, that kind of took me back a little bit. I wanted to also talk about, well, let's get some questions from I got a few things I want to talk about. Let's get some questions from the peanut gallery here. The comment section on the YouTube live stream. We probably appreciate everybody coming in here. Brock Madonic, I believe I got your name right this time, man. You're always in the live stream. I always appreciate you. I see some other guys checked in, Josh Newark and Scott Lynch and Royce Beacom, some regulars. It's always nice to see some familiar names on the comment section. But Brock Madonic says, what are your thoughts on Parker Stewart and Marcus Carr entering the draft? 2 players from the Stallings era. Are you impressed to see these kids entering the draft? What are your thoughts on how they were when they played at Pitt and how they excelled? Marcus Carr and Parker Stewart, I think they were good players. Marcus Carr is thrust into the limelight as a starting point guard as a freshman. I think a year later we saw a freshman take over the point guard duties and do it better than Marcus Carr did. But Parker Stewart was a great 3-point shooter. Marcus Carr was good enough as a point guard as a freshman. I think you could see the potential for him to get better, and I think he has gotten better. As far as entering the draft, I don't think either guy has announced that they're going to hire an agent yet. This is where the NCAA or the NBA, whoever makes these rules, gets it right with regards to the draft and guys who want to enter early. That in basketball, you can go out, put your name into the draft, do some exploration, and if you don't like what you're hearing, you can bail on it. You can go back to school. Football should have that option too. Instead, once you declare, you're in. You're out of. There's no sort of dip your toes, test the waters type of. I guess you can put in for paperwork and get an evaluation back from the NFL that says you're a first-round pick, a second-round pick, or undrafted, right? And that's what these guys, Jalen Twyman and Patrick Jones and Paris Ford did this past year. You can put in for that paperwork, I guess, in football, but it's not the same as. I think you can get more involved in the process in basketball. And if you're Parker, Stewart, you're Marcus Carr, you're a lot of guys in college basketball right now, and you don't know what's going to come next. You don't know what is going to be next season. You might as well test the waters and see what you can find out. If you don't like what you hear, you go back to school and see if they're going to have school. You know what I mean? You find out what's going to come of the next athletics year. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think Carr and Stewart were really nice players. I think they would have been fine at Pitt. I think they could have played in the ACC. Marcus Carr, I think he went to Minnesota, so he's played in the Big Ten. Parker Stewart went to UT Martin. Is that right? Tennessee Martin with his dad as a coach. I think they could have, could they have helped this team? Yeah, probably. How would it have worked? Would they have had Xavier Johnson and Marcus Carr together on the court? I don't know what that would look like. I'd like to see Xavier Johnson playing with Parker Stewart. I'd like to see Marcus Carr playing with Parker Stewart. I'd like to see Trey McGowan's playing with Parker Stewart. I think McGowan's playing with Marcus Carr. I think they're good players. I think Kevin Stallings, for whatever we want to say, did recruit some pretty decent guys to the roster. I think Carr and Stewart were probably 2 of the best. I always liked Shamil Stevenson's game. I thought he could be another Chevy Troutman type, sort of a big body guy under the basket who could rebound and get putbacks and that kind of thing. It just never really clicked between him and this staff. But they brought in some decent players. It's just you don't want to be having to fill a roster the way. You don't want to have to fill a roster the way Kevin Stallings did. So, Carr and Stewart, best of luck to them. They were always nice kids. I thought they were nice to talk to. I thought they were nice, good ball players. And I think Jeff Capel would have liked to have them stick around for a while, and could have helped the team. Let's see here in the comments, Pitt Parade saying 7.5 win average will keep Pat Narduzzi at Pitt for 5 more years. In my opinion, yeah, I think you're probably right. I don't think that's Yeah, I don't know. It depends on what those 7.5 wins per year look like. You know what I mean? If Narduzzi averages 8 wins per year, I think it's hard to fire him. But if it looks like the 8 wins from this past season, where you have a Boston College and a Miami loss every year, Virginia, Penn State, you were more or less competitive in those games, and those were against good teams. You know, if you lose to a Boston College and a Miami every year, then it gets harder to sell that 8 wins a season. Now, I guess kind of I don't know if it's a caveat or sort of the hidden clause in there is that, I mean, if Pitt's only winning 8 games a season, they're probably going to have Boston College and Miami-esque losses because there aren't that many good teams on their schedule that they can go through and lose 4 games and have them all be losses to really good teams. You know, or even very good teams or pretty good teams like a Virginia or a Penn State, or even something like a Virginia Tech. You know, you're going to have, if you lose 4 games or 5 games, you are going to have a Boston College loss. You're going to have a Miami loss. And if you keep having those kinds of losses, then I think it becomes a tougher sell. But, you know, if you can average 8 wins and manage to not really have any bad losses or keep them to a minimum, then yeah, I think he can stick around for a while. Colin Towell says, I think Pat Narduzzi's recruiting is getting better. 2021 has a chance to be a special class. I agree. I think they do have a chance. Now, the pandemic, the emergency dead period, the lockdown, all these things, this is affecting it. Okay? And if this extends into June, it's going to affect it considerably. Because that obviously is when Pitt likes to make a killing in recruiting. And that's when they have historically made a killing, especially since they can start doing official visits in June as they did the last couple years. And they made a killing. They got a lot of guys in June. Not being able to get kids on campus this spring has hurt in recruiting. And it's not just hurting Pitt. It's hurting everybody. I know schools are getting commitments, but it's hurting. Everybody is suffering from this situation. But the class has a potential to be Narduzzi's best class. I think the 2020 class was Narduzzi's best class. I think time is going to tell on that one. You know, this class that they just signed, these guys who are coming in to be freshmen this coming season, I think it can be his best class. Obviously, guys have to live up to their potential and pan out and all those, develop and you know, and adapt to college well. But I think it can be Pat Narduzzi's best class. 2021, if all goes according to plan, can be even better, I think. And that's, you know, that's going to be a pretty good foundation for the next 4 or 5 years with these back-to-back classes. 2019's showing some promise too. There are guys in that 2019 class that are going to help. They're going to help this year, and they're definitely going to help in 2021 and beyond. Royce Beacom says, you know, he doesn't think any of the previous Pitt coaches had the same type of support that Pat Narduzzi has, and I do think that's important too. Pat Narduzzi has more support from the administration than Paul Chryst, Todd Graham, and Dave Wannstedt put together. And that's not to say those guys were not supported. I think Paul Chryst got a lot of what he was asking for. I think, you know, Todd Graham didn't get as much as he wanted to get. But he got some. I mean, all those guys got something. Dave Wannstedt will tell you that he didn't get anything that he asked for, but they all got something. But this current administration, and that's the athletic director, or the director of athletics, and the chancellor, both really committed to athletics, and it has to start at the top of the chancellor. I mean, that's and again, this isn't to say Mark Nordenberg wasn't committed to athletics, but Patrick Gallagher has taken it to another level. His commitment to athletics is unprecedented for the past. I don't know. I don't know how far back you would have to go. My history doesn't go back that far. But I think, Patrick Gallagher's been pretty special for this athletic department in terms of his support. There are very few things, I get the impression there are very few things he has said no to. And that's important. And it's important for the head coach to know he has that too. And I don't think you can overstate how important that was in keeping Pat Narduzzi at Pitt when Michigan State apparently became some kind of an option. I think knowing he had that connection with the chancellor, the chancellor was closely involved in his hiring, There was no athletic director at that time. They had an interim athletic director. Being closely involved with the chancellor's hire, or being closely involved with Pat Narduzzi's hiring, I think has given Narduzzi a close connection with the chancellor, and it's put a lot of support in place. And so a lot of the things Pat Narduzzi has wanted to be able to do, he's been able to do it. And you go around the Southside facility, and it looks like a totally different place inside. Recruiting budget is up, staff budget is up, coaches' salaries. I mean, all of these things, the kind of support you need from the top, it's there. Now, you could say, well, okay, then he better start winning more than 8 freaking games. He better stop losing freaking Miami and Boston College. And you're right. He does need to do that, particularly with the support that he has. Let's see. What else we got here in the comments? Colin Tao says, if Heather Lyke were to make a change, I'd be very intrigued to see who she could get due to her recent hires. Yeah, I'd be interested to see Heather Lyke on the trail hunting for a head football coach. She obviously, I think, did really well in getting Jeff Capel. I think Mike Bell and Lance White are interesting hires. Guys with ACC experience like Capel. Both of those guys coming from Florida State, but it'd be interesting to see. Football is there's this is something I've been thinking about often, and I was thinking about this in the context of Mike Haywood, actually, Pitt's head coach for like 2 weeks in December of 2010. And somebody asked on the message board as we were having this conversation about coaching changes, somebody said, how could they ever even hire that guy? What a disaster. Why would they even hire him? And you got to remember that, at the time, I don't think when Dave Wanstead was fired, I don't think Michael Haywood's name was on the top of anyone's list. I don't think anybody was saying like, hey, that's one of the guys they got to look at. But I think you look at it, he won 9 games at Miami of Ohio that season, that 2010 season. That was his second year at Miami of Ohio. The year previous, they went 1-11. And so he goes 9-4, and wins the MAC under his leadership. And I think you look at it, and he was on the verge of becoming that next kind of rising star from the MAC. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't quite there yet, but he was another 9-win MAC championship season away from being on like Big Ten radars. And so I think for Pitt, the idea was, when they came around to Michael Haywood, and he wasn't the number one choice. He wasn't their first choice. But when they came around to Michael Haywood, because their first choice was, and Pitt Parade chimes in, I think they might have won 10 games that season. You're right. Miami of Ohio, I think, did win 10 games that year, but he didn't coach the bowl game. He went 9-4 with Miami of Ohio. You're right. I think Miami did win 10. So, he gets them to that level. But it's funny, I think the first choice for Pitt was Al Golden, who was at Temple, which is another guy who is, kind of rising star outside the power conferences that you're trying to get. And I think, whether you look at, Butch Jones isn't a great example, but he's a guy who went from Cincinnati to a big job. Mark D'Antonio is a guy who went from Cincinnati to a bit. Brian Kelly, all these guys went from Cincinnati. I think Pitt needed to try and hire. I guess Cincinnati was in its own coaching change at that point, or maybe Butch Jones was. I forget. But the idea, I think, was to get that rising star out of the MAC, and maybe get there a year ahead of time. Get there 1 year before he really blew up and became prominent in bigger coaching searches, Big Ten or SEC or ACC. Because if you're Pitt, when you're going out to hire a new coach, you kind of have two. There's two types of guys that fit the profile, right? There's two. You either go after a rising star in the MAC or Conference USA, a head coach, like Florida State going to get Mike Norvell out of Memphis, right? You go get someone like that, or you hire a Power 5 coordinator. And I guess I shouldn't say just a school like Pitt, because, as we said, Florida State just did that. You and although their hire before that was a guy out of the Pac-12. But if you're a school like Pitt, I mean, you're not going to hire away a head coach from another Power 5 conference. You know, you're probably not going to be able to pull that off unless there's some extenuating circumstances, like Gary Anderson leaves Wisconsin for Oregon State. Well, he didn't want to be at Wisconsin anymore. You know, or Brett Bielema leaves, Wisconsin for Arkansas. I mean, those guys wanted to leave, Wisconsin for a variety of reasons. But if you're Pitt, you're probably not going to be able to pull that off without some extenuating circumstances. So what you're going to do is go look for that rising star out of the MAC, which is what they, found in Michael Haywood, or, at a Conference USA with Tulsa with Todd Graham, or you try and get the Power 5 coordinator, which is what they got with Paul Chryst and ultimately with Pat Narduzzi. You go for one of those two profiles, and that's what Haywood. I mean, that's what I think the appeal was with Michael Haywood. Now, it was a disaster of a coaching search because it wasn't hard to find that the guy had some, skeletons in his closet, so to speak. I mean, a bit of a shady background that you probably should have turned up and should have been a bit of a red flag for you. But that's where Pitt needs to look. And if Heather Lyke were to go into a football coaching search, which I don't think she's on the verge of doing at all, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, you look what she did already. She got Jeff Capel, top ACC assistant, Mike Bell, top ACC assistant, Lance White, top ACC assistant. So I think her three, I forget about the softball hire. I always, I can always remember those three guys, but I always forget the softball hire and kind of what her background was. But I mean, that's probably what I would imagine Heather Lyke would attempt to do, is find a Power 5 coordinator, and if her track record is any indication, potentially one in the ACC. Let's see. A lot of comments here. Pit Parade blowing us up on the comments here. I think the last one, was it worth nearly gutting the program for a rising MAC coach? Well, I don't think you fired Dave Wanstead thinking that you were going to be hiring 4 more coaches over the next 5 years. I mean, you made an error in hiring Michael Haywood. If you could have found the next Mark D'Antonio, or, I say Mike Norvell, we don't know what, he's ultimately going to do at Florida State, or even Todd Graham, had some successes at Arizona State. That's the kind of thing that you're trying to find. And in theory, that should be an upgrade. If you're going to get the next Brian Kelly or somebody, and you can mock these names if you want, but they're coaches that went from that lower level up to one of the power conferences and had success. Well, that's what you're trying to get if you're at Pitt. Was it worth gutting the program? You tried to improve, I don't know. I've come around on thinking that you could have given Dave Wanstead another year, but we're not going to, we relitigate this all the time, and I'm not going to go down that path just now. I did want to talk, though, about something else. This is a plug for our Friday podcast. And, I said last week, our Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan is on hiatus for a little bit here. Just because everything is sort of up in the air. Like I say, everything's on hiatus in this this world right now. So that's on hiatus. And since it went on hiatus, I thought, well, I'll bring back a second podcast for the week. And we'll do it on Fridays. We'll release it on Fridays. And we put out our first one last week, and I hope you got a chance to catch it. Pat Bostic joined us, because my thought is that every Friday we'll have a new interview podcast. We'll just get a guest and we'll talk to them for a little while, and maybe former player, former coach, current player if we can, current coach if we can. Who knows? Some sort of Pitt related person who maybe has some insight that you would like to hear, that might be an interesting person to hear from. So we had Pat Bostic last week, and hopefully you got a chance to hear him. We talked a little bit about the old days, but we mostly talked about this current team and kind of his expectations for it, my expectations for it, if there's going to be football, what we think this team is going to be. So that was kind of a fun look at the present. It was good to talk to Pat, and hopefully, again, I hope you get a chance to check that out. This Friday, I'm excited about this. This is a fun conversation to have. We're going to talk to Lateef Grimm. Remember Lateef Grimm? Pitt wide receiver, 1998 to 2000. really successful. Really the start of the wide receiver U movement was Lateef Grimm. I mean, he was the guy who really broke it open, I think, and before Larry Fitzgerald, before Antonio Bryant, there was Lateef Grimm. And, I think he gets a little bit forgotten. So I was like, let's get him on the phone. He was actually suggested to me, thought, he'd make a good guest. So I said, okay, let's get him on the phone and let's have a conversation with him. And that's going to be on the Friday podcast. So hopefully you can get a chance to check that out. But thinking about Lateef Grimm, though, it feels like a forgotten man in Pitt history, doesn't he? Like, I can bring up now, and if you're watching on the YouTube video, I'm going to bring up something for you to check out here. Let me see if I can get it to show up on the screen the way I want it to. It's a video that Pitt put out of its wide receivers history. Oh, the screen a little bit bigger. Let's move it down here. You can watch it on the live stream. But it's a video of Pitt wide receivers, and there's something you'll notice about this, or I noticed, because I'm watching it. I see guys like Tyler Boyd, Larry
Fitzgerald open, a diving catch for a touchdown.
Are you kidding me?
Fitzgerald goes in the air, touchdown. He's done it again.
Sorry about that. Sorry if that jumped the sound there. I didn't realize the levels were up. No, but I'm looking at sorry about that. Josh Newark says turn down the auto. I apologize. This didn't work as well as I'd hoped with the technology. So hopefully it is corrected there. Let me know in the comments. Now you can't hear me. All right, I'm just gonna get the video out of here. This was a disaster of a. Hold on. All right, now I think everybody can hear me now. So that was a disaster of an exercise there. I apologize. Tried to put a video on there, but my point is this. All right, so this is a Pitt wide receiver video that they put out in 2015, and it's on YouTube. And they've got and you guys in the comments tell me if you can hear me again. Hopefully you can. Perfect now. Good. Thanks, Josh. Josh Newark helping me out. So Pitt put out this video in 2015, wide receivers, right? And they've got Devin Street, and they've got Tyler Boyd, and they've got Jonathan Baldwin, they've got Antonio Bryant, and they've got Larry Fitzgerald. But they don't have Lateef Grimm. And Grimm wasn't that far before Antonio Bryant. He overlapped with Antonio Bryant. And he didn't have the NFL career, but, I mean, neither did Devin Street. There was like one NFL catch from... There was one NFL catch from Jonathan Baldwin in there, but they leave out Lateef Grimm, and I don't understand it, because when Lateef Grimm finished his career in 2000, he was Pitt's all-time leading receiver. He's currently, what is he right now? He was number one all-time, and he is now, I had it written down. He was number one all-time in receptions, and he was like number two in receiving yards, and he is now currently number three. There we go. Sorry about that. Yes, that's right. Pitt Parade came to Pitt in 1998. He was there 1998 to 2000. Lateef Grimm is number three in Pitt receptions. He's number... I have career receiving yards. He's number 5 in career receiving yards. And yet, he almost feels like a forgotten man. And not only was he really productive, I mean, he had a great season. A sophomore year, he had 75 catches for 1,106 yards and 4 touchdowns in 1999. Not only was he really productive, not only did he catch 178 passes in his career for 2,680 yards, but he did it at a time, and he was successful at a time when Pitt wasn't very successful. They won 2 games in 1998, his freshman year. They won 5 games in 1999. They finally got back to a bowl for the first time in a long time in 2000. And Lateef Grimm was a big part of that. He was a big part of that turnaround for Walt Harris when Harris came to Pitt, in the late 1990s. And yet we seem to kind of forget about him a little bit, and it's kind of curious, because he was a really good player. I mean, before Antonio Bryant, before Larry Fitzgerald, there was Lateef Grimm. And he's a guy that, I had a hard time even finding highlights of him, individual highlights. You can find some highlights from a few of the games he played in while he was at Pitt, but it's hard to find individual highlights. But it was interesting to talk to Lateef, but it got me kind of thinking about forgotten players. And I'm not going to try and put another video on the screen for this. I was going to, but not with the audio issues we had, so I apologize about that again. But I started thinking about like other forgotten players, and there's part of me that thinks that in a few years, particularly if he doesn't continue to play in the NFL, Quadri Olesen might become one of those forgotten players. There's only 6 running backs in Pitt history who have multiple 1,000-yard seasons. Only 6. And Quadri Olesen's one of those 6 guys. Because he went for 1,000 yards in 2015, and then he had 1,000 yards in 2018. And he was a big part in 2018 of Pitt's first ACC championship, a division championship. And I feel like in a couple years, he's just going to kind of fade off the radar. Again, I don't know. Am I alone in that? Because it seems like he accomplished a whole lot. And Josh Newark says, how about Quadri Henderson? He's forgotten as well. Yeah, but he had one really special year, and a lot of guys have had a special year. A lot of guys have had a nice year. But Quadri Olesen, multiple 1,000-yard rushing seasons, and was a big part of a Coastal Championship winning team. And I kind of feel like, 10 years from now, his name's going to resonate about as much as like Ray Kirkley or somebody. And he had accomplished a lot more than Ray Kirkley. I mean, you think about like Kevin Barlow. Kevin Barlow had a 1,000-yard season in 2000, but nobody really talks about Kevin Barlow. Nobody really thinks about Kevin Barlow. And he only had, he only had 1,000-yard season. But it's kind of, I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what you can do to remember a guy more, but it seems like Quadri Olesen might sort of fade off the pages. Do you feel like we kind of forget Tyler Boyd a little bit too? Not the same. I mean, Boyd, I think, was far more sensational than Olesen. He was one of the more sensational players of Pitt in the 2010s. I mean, if you want to make a list of the most explosive or most exciting players from 2010 to 2020 at Pitt, I mean, Tyler Boyd, he's probably number 1, isn't he? And yet, I don't know. Maybe it's because James Conner plays for the Steelers that we still kind of connect him to Pitt a lot, during his NFL career. But I feel like that connection with Tyler Boyd is not there. He's not the best receiver in the NFL, but he's pretty good, and he was great at Pitt. And yet, I feel like we don't really connect him as well to Pitt, or Antonio Bryant for that matter. When Bryant was at Pitt, I mean, he was one of the great receivers in college football when he played at college. But then when he went to the NFL, and I mean, some of it is, can we see these guys? Some of it is how much, effort do they make to connect with the university and stay connected with the university and all these things. But I don't know. Do you still connect, Antonio Bryant significantly with Pitt? Do you still connect Tyler Boyd significantly with Pitt? Maybe some of that's on him. Maybe he needs to do more in that regard. But I mean, I think he's still around. But it doesn't seem to resonate as much as like a guy like James Conner. And probably Conner's the one that, or Aaron Donald. And that's because Aaron Donald's the best player in the NFL, and Pitt fans obviously want to connect him with Pitt as much as they can. But I don't know. It's just curious how some of these guys mean so much to the program for 4 years or 5 years or 3 years or whatever it is, and then, sort of fade here and there. Royce Beacom says, regarding Lateef Grimm, does he get overshadowed because they had 2 good receivers at the same time with Grimm and Antonio Bryant? Can you name a year when Pitt had 2 really good wide receivers like that? And Pitt Parade already answered for me. He said Devin Street and Tyler Boyd in 2013. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think Boyd and Street were really good in 2013. Boyd came in and overshadowed Devin Street in 2013, but those two as a receiving tandem with Tom Savage throwing the ball. We always talk about Paul Chryst wanting to pound the ball and run it, which they did in 2014. But 2013, they threw it pretty effectively. And quite honestly, I mean, they did in 2012 as well. Tino Sinceri threw for 3,000 yards, which is often, you talk about overlooked seasons. I don't think Tino has been forgotten by anyone, but, I think he gets his 3,000-yard season gets overlooked probably a little bit. I don't know. It's fun to think about some of those other players. If you're on the live stream, you can see I've got a slideshow playing, just give you something other than me to look at, and that's actually from the Virginia Tech game in 2018. Speaking of games where Quadri Olson was a special player, but the Virginia Tech game in 2018, I just figured I'll just put a slideshow up of that because those uniforms look great, and it's a bunch of good photos of Pitt in good uniforms. Run down the list here. See what else people are asking about, talking about just these wide receiver tandems. And yeah, I mean, Street and Boyd were very good together in 2013. And, 2012, I think Street and Mike Shanahan and Devin Street teamed up in 2012 and were really good. I was just looking at this, actually. Devin Street caught 73 passes for his yardage didn't show up. He caught 73 passes in 2012. And Mike Shanahan had 983 receiving yards in 2012. Again, with Tino Sinceri throwing for 3,000 passing yards, they turned out, to be pretty productive. And it's funny because, like I say, 2012, 2013, it was a pretty effective passing game for Pitt. And then 2014, it just became pound the ball with James Conner. And, somewhere in there, there's a balance. Although, I don't know if 2020 Pitt is going to have it or not, but somewhere in between there is a balance. So, see what else I had on my list that I wanted to get to. Oh, Rod Rutherford. Is Rod Rutherford a forgotten guy? Yeah, I mean, I think so many times we're just all too willing to just say, oh, he just threw it up to Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, he had to be pretty good, and he was pretty good, as a quarterback. NFL career or not, I mean, the guy was really productive. He had a great wide receiver, which you need, obviously, but he was a pretty good quarterback. And I do think we forget him a little bit as well, or overlook his career at Pitt. And when people talk about, best quarterback of the 2000s, or there was a thing on Twitter, if you could pick quarterback, a running back, two receivers, and a tight end or something, to lead you in a 2-minute drill to win the game, blah, 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 which quarterback from the last 20 years you're picking. And I didn't see many selections of Rod Rutherford, and I mean, that guy did really well at Pitt, didn't he? I don't know. Forgotten guys, these guys, like I say, they're a big part of your Pitt experience in, let me think. He was a big part of your Pitt experience in, for a handful of years, and then you move on, you recruit new guys, and you start to fade on that interest. So, I don't know, something to think about as we move through here. Make sure you grab some of this Elysian Contact Hazy IPA. It's a very tasty beverage, and hopefully you grab some of that because it's pretty good. Although, like I say, I'm running low, so I'm gonna have to go see if they actually have any at the distributor. So don't buy them all. Save some for me. A few people are chiming in. Yeah, there were other receiving targets on those 2002 and 2003 teams, and I agree. But I think people tend to just sort of write off Rod Rutherford as, well, he just threw it up to Fitzgerald all the time. And, just kind of ignore the fact that, as, Pitt Parade and Josh Newark are saying, there were other guys on that team who could catch passes and did catch passes. I mean, Rutherford had 3,000-yard season, didn't just throw it to Fitzgerald every time. Threw it to Fitzgerald a lot of times, not every time. And that's shouldn't be ignored, and probably should give Rod Rutherford a little more credit than he gets for his career at Pitt. Like I say, Lateef Grimm will join us on the Friday podcast. Make sure you check that out. We'll post it on Panther-Lair.com and on iTunes and Podbean all those places where you like to get your podcasts. So look for that and check it out. And in the meantime, check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I always like to say it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, recruiting, whatever your flavor, whatever your pleasure, you can find it there. Pitt related, at least. You can find it at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And of course, we have message boards where we can interact and talk about Pitt sports all day, every day. We take an hour out here on Tuesday nights to sit down and get on the video and get in the comments and get on the questions and all those things. And we talk here, but you can also you can go to the message boards, Panther-Lair.com, and do it all day, every day. And that's what we do. There's topics going there all the time, people talking about Pitt sports. I always like to say it's hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. So go check that out, Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thank you so much for joining the live stream tonight on Tuesday night. If you didn't do it, thank you for listening to the podcast. Whenever it is that you're listening to this, make sure you check out the website. Check out our Friday podcast with Lateef Grimm. That'll be a fun conversation. And we'll be back next Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m. for the live stream. Record the next Panther-Lair Show. Hopefully you can tune in and pop some more questions and comments. Thanks, everybody who was in the comments and the questions tonight. We appreciate it. Hope you have a great night, great weekend, and great rest of the week. And we will talk to you next week.